Ever wonder what really crosses the border when no one's watching? It's not just drugs, not just guns. Sometimes it's children, silent, hidden, locked inside armored trains. That's exactly what landed on Kristi Noem's desk. An unmarked envelope with no return address. Inside, aerial photos of a CJNG convoy and a chilling note. It's not drug, it's not weapons. It's something they treat like gold. It could have been buried. Just another operation lost in the noise of politics, ignored by those too afraid to act. But not this time. Because Kristi didn't flinch. She moved, fast, quiet, surgical. No press, no backup. Just one mission: find out what the hell was on that train. What she uncovered didn't just rattle the Department of Homeland Security. It ripped the mask off a cross-border child trafficking network. So precise, so protected, you'll wonder how deep this goes. And once you see what was inside that train, you'll never look at the system the same way again. Moment 1. Kristi Noem, Secretary of Homeland Security, receives an anonymous envelope containing photos of a CJNG armored train about to depart from Mexico. It started with something that didn't belong. Just a plain envelope, no stamp, no return address, just sitting there like it had appeared out of nowhere. When Kristi Noem, the newly appointed Secretary of Homeland Security, opened it, her instincts kicked in. These weren't ordinary files. These were satellite shots of something the U.S. government had never seen cross its radar. A heavily armored train deep in cartel territory. And not just any cartel. It was CJNG. That name alone meant red flags everywhere. She leaned back, brows furrowed. Noem had seen her share of threats, political smokescreen, false alarm. But this was different. The message scribbled on the back of one of the photos hit like a punch. It's not drugs. It's not weapons. It's something they treat like gold. That line, it haunted her. It meant whatever was inside that train wasn't just dangerous. It was protected, sacred to them. And that made it deadly. Noem didn't call a meeting. She didn't alert her staff. Hell, she didn't even tell her chief of intel. She sat in silence, letting the realities settle in. She knew exactly what had to be done next. But deep down, she also knew this wasn't just another operation. This was going to pull back a curtain most people never knew existed. And once it opened, there'd be no going back. Moment 2. The message warns, it's not drug, it's not weapon, it's something they treat like gold. See, that one sentence, short, scrawled in sharp ink, held more weight than most intelligence briefings ever do. It's not drugs, it's not weapon, it's something they treat like gold. Kristi read it again and again. Because when a cartel like CJNG puts something on a pedestal higher than cocaine or rifle, you don't ask questions, you act. That phrase alone flipped the script. It meant this wasn't about profit anymore. It was about something far more, possibly dark, and definitely not meant to be seen. It's wild how a few words can crack open an entire operation. She wasn't just dealing with another cartel shipment. This was layered, encrypted with meaning. Gold. Gold, in this context, didn't mean literal treasure. It meant value. Human, symbolic, strategic. And the fact that CJNG guarded it with such secrecy meant that whatever it was had implications far beyond border. Kristi didn't flinch. She'd been around long enough to know when monsters guard something like gold, it's rarely anything other than flesh and blood. And that's when her gut made the decision for her. No waiting, no approval, just swift, silent movement. She ordered her most trusted intelligence unit to drop everything and start tracking. No traceable comm, no open chatter. The type of operation where only first names are used. And silence is law. Because whatever was in that train, whatever they were willing to kill for, had just become her problem. Moment 3. Suspicious. Noem discreetly assembles an elite DHS team to investigate. Kristi didn't waste time. She moved like someone who'd seen too much to play it safe. No press conference, no email chain, just a few encrypted calls to people who didn't need explanation, only coordinate. She knew that to deal with CJNG, you didn't just soldier, you needed ghosts. People who operated in the shadows, off the book, outside the noise. She activated her inner circle at DHS. Analysts, tacticians, field operators, all seasoned, all trust. Not one questioned her. They knew the look in her eyes meant this wasn't routine. There's a difference between acting fast and acting smart. Noem did both. She knew this had to stay below the radar, not just from the cartel, but from Washington, because sometimes the real threats aren't outside the system, they're inside it. The team met in a nondescript base below a DC logistics facility. No windows, no label, just a map of northern Mexico, a laptop with satellite feeds, and a growing sense of urgency pulsing through the room. The clock was ticking, and whatever was inside that armored train, they needed eyes on it. Kristi stood at the head of the table, dead calm. She gave the briefing herself, not because she didn't trust her staff, but because this had to come from her. She laid out the images, the message, the route. The room went still. No one spoke. No one needed to. Every single agent knew if CJNG was smuggling something more valuable than drugs, this was no longer just law enforcement. This was a breach of humanity. Moment 4. Satellite images confirm the train exists, heavily armored and headed north. Hours later, confirmation hit the monitors like a thunderclap. There it was, a matte black locomotive slicing through the Mexican landscape, escorted by 4 tactical trucks and 2 unmarked helicopters. No emblem, no flag, just steel and intimidation. The satellite imagery was crystal clear. Heat signatures along the roof, heavy plating over the engine, and aerial drones trailing just outside radar range. This wasn't just transportation. It was a fortress on rail. The cartel wasn't hiding this train. They were daring someone to try and stop it. Kristi leaned over the satellite feed, eyes locked. She'd seen armored convoy, high-value narco transfers, even tunnel systems under border crossing, but never this. A moving war machine disguised as cargo. It was surreal. Every detail screamed escalation. This wasn't just a shift in cartel strategy. This was a statement. And the fact it was moving north, that meant one thing. Whatever was inside, it was meant to reach American soil. That couldn't happen. The DHS team mapped out the trajectory in silence. Border Patrol hadn't flagged it. Mexican authorities hadn't reported it, which meant only one thing. Someone in power was helping it move. Kristi didn't say it out loud, but everyone in the room felt it. Corruption was in play, and this train was the tip of the blade. What mattered now wasn't who let it happen, but how fast they could intercept before it crossed the line. Moment 5. Thermal drones reveal something disturbing inside the third car. Small organic heat signal. At 2:47 a.m., the drone feed came in. Grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. The third rail car, boxed in the middle of the armored convoy, lit up like a heartbeat on the thermal scan. Not one, not two, but dozens clustered heat signals. Small, moving, human. And there was no mistaking the size. These weren't adult. The silence in the operations room was deafening. You didn't need to be an analyst to know what they were looking at. This wasn't contraband. This was cargo that breathed. Kristi stood frozen, eyes glued to the screen, her jaw set like stone. In that moment, theory turned to truth. The train wasn't just carrying something valuable. It was transporting lives. Small ones. The kind that should have been in school, not sealed steel. A mix of dread and fury simmered just beneath her skin. These weren't prisoners. They weren't gang recruits. They were children, smuggled like animals, guarded like gold. And if she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she'd never believe it. She leaned in close, speaking with a calm that disguised the storm brewing underneath. Get me a second confirmation. I want the drone on the roof. She needed visual proof, not just to act, but to hold someone accountable when the storm hit. Because this wasn't just criminal. This was a crime against humanity, unfolding in real time. And Kristi knew, once this was out, there'd be no turning back. Moment 6. Analysis confirmed. Live children are locked inside armored compartments. Confirmation came fast. Too fast. The drone dipped low, capturing just enough light through a roof vent to catch movement. Tiny finger, a face pressed against a metal grate. Noem didn't blink. She watched every frame like it was being etched into her bone. There it was. Proof. Children. Real. Terrified. Dehydrated. Packed like cargo into a rolling tomb of steel. It hit her like a gut punch. Every instinct in her screamed, "Move now." The DHS analysts double-checked the reading. No error. Heart rates detected. Breathing patterns steady but weak. Some bodies didn't move at all. That's when Noem dropped protocol entirely. "We're not waiting for clearance," she said, her voice razor-sharp. "This isn't a border issue. This is a humanitarian crisis in motion." She looked around the room, daring anyone to challenge her. No one did. Everyone knew what was at stake. The mission just shifted from investigation to rescue. Kristi's team got to work like a machine. Maps lit up. Routes were recalculated. Intercept points were drawn and redrawn. The third car became ground zero. No one spoke of contingent. They only planned for success. Because when children are at the center of the story, there's no room for hesitation. This story, it was just beginning to unravel in the most horrifying way. Moment 7. Noem orders a covert operation to intercept the train before it reaches the U.S. border. There are moments when leadership isn't about title, it's about gut. Noem didn't blink. She gave the order with the clarity of someone who knew the cost of waiting. "We stop train before it even smells the border." The room froze for half a second, then lit up like a war room. Phones buzzed. Coordinates locked. She had no congressional approval, no legal cushion, just a clock ticking and a train carrying lives. Couldn't afford another mile. She didn't want headline. She didn't want a public operation with sirens and soundbite. This had to be quiet, surgical, invisible. A strike team was assembled from deep inside the DHS playbook, the kind of unit that doesn't wear uniform, doesn't carry rank, and disappears after the job's done. These weren't just agents. These were shadows, men and women who moved like whistles, struck like lightning. Kristi stood by the ops table, watching the red blip on the map move inch by inch toward U.S. soil. "This ends before it begins," she said under her breath. But even as plans were set in motion, something inside her knew this wasn't going to clean. Because when you try to stop a monster mid-meal, it doesn't go quietly. Moment 8. Technicians discreetly sabotage section of the railway, forcing the train to stop. The strike team moved under moonlight. No light, no chatter, just boot, breath, and purpose. Deep in a remote stretch of track far from civilian eye, DHS tech special crouched low, tools built for sabotage. They didn't need to derail the train, just slow it. A strategic bend in the track was weakened just enough to trigger emergency braking without tipping off the engineer. One crack in the steel. That's all it would take. One imperfection, and the whole beast would have to stop and check. The op was clean, silent. 10 minutes in and out. Noem had orchestrated it like a chess move 3 steps ahead. The key wasn't to destroy, it was to delay. Because time was the only weapon they had to outmaneuver a cartel that always seemed 1 step ahead. And in that window of forced stillness, her team would strike. Everything had to look like a mechanical error, just a fluke in an aging Mexican railway. Nothing more, nothing suspicious. As the team exfiltrated through the brush, the tension thickened. Everyone knew this was the pivot. If the sabotage worked, they'd have their shot. Failed, that train wouldn't stop until it crossed the U.S. line, and by then, it would be too late. The red dot on the screen was still moving, slowly, toward the broken point. Noem leaned in and whispered, "Come on, just one crack. One crack is all we need." Moment 9. Agents surround the train. A brief firefight breaks out with CJNG guards. The train groaned to a halt, right where they needed. No alarm, no panic, just the hiss of brakes and a veil of silence. That's when the strike team made their move. From both sides of the canyon, from behind trees, out of the dark. Precision, coordination, like wolves closing in. But CJNG isn't stupid. Within seconds, doors slammed open and guards poured out with AKs, body armor, and the kind of rage that only comes from knowing you've been outplayed. Bullets cracked through the still air. It was fast, brutal. One DHS agent took a hit to the vest, but kept moving. The team was trained for chaos, and this was pure chaos. CJNG opened fire blind, desperate. But desperation is no match for discipline. In under 4 minutes, the cartel's defense folded. Some fled into the dark, some surrendered. The rest were dropped where they stood. Noem, watching remotely, didn't flinch, but her jaw locked. No fatality, she'd ordered, unless absolutely necessary. Her team had listened, barely. The train sat, wounded and quiet, under the stars. But the real fight hadn't even begun. That was just the warm-up. Because what waited inside those rail cars, that's where the war was hiding. And now, the doors were about to open. Moment 10. The rescue begins. Over 20 children are found, silent, starved, and in shock. They weren't ready for what they saw. You can't be. No amount of training prepares you. Children locked in steel boxes like livestock. The first door creaked open, and silence poured out. No scream, no movement, just a thick, suffocating stillness. Huddled together in the dark, over 20 kids stared back with hollow eyes, dirt-smudged faces, ribs pressing against skin, and not one of them cried. That's what hit hardest, the quiet, like the fear had drained their ability to feel anything at all. The agents moved in gently, voices low, weapons lowered. Noem had drilled it into them. This wasn't a raid, it was a rescue. They brought blankets, water, soft food. Some kids couldn't walk. Some clutched each other like they'd die if they let go. They didn't speak, but their eyes told stories that would never fit in a report. Every breath was a miracle, and every second felt like borrowed time. The trauma was thick in the air, like smoke after a fire that still hadn't gone out. Back at the command post, Noem listened to the radio feed with her hand over her mouth. One agent whispered, "They're alive, but barely." That's when her mission shifted again. This wasn't just about taking down a train. This was about making sure these kids were never hidden again. But even as they loaded the children into evac vans, something Something gnawed at her. If this was just one train, what else was moving in the dark? Moment 11. In another car, stacks of cash, crates of weapons, hard drives, documents, and a mobile genetic lab. If the children were the heart of the train's horror, the next car was its brain. When the agents cracked open the second armored container, it was like stepping into a narco sci-fi nightmare. Bundles of US dollars packed in duffel bags, crates of high-grade assault rifles, many still wrapped in foreign military seals, and on the far end, a makeshift lab, cold, sterile, humming with quiet menace, fridges labeled in code, vials of blood, tissue sample, even a working centrifuge still spinning. This wasn't smuggling, this was science, cartel style. The hard drives, loaded and encrypted, were scooped up immediately. There were logs with name, initials, and strange medical symbols, a wall of passport, most fake. A whiteboard with routes drawn in red ink, connecting not just Mexico and the U.S., but other countries. This train wasn't just a transport, it was a hub, a moving archive of operations, a floating crime scene designed to never stay still long enough to get caught. Noem's team froze when they saw the genetic equipment. They're cataloging people, one analyst muttered. It hit different. This wasn't just about traffic. This was organized, industrialized, and planned down to the molecule. Kristi's voice cut through the comms. Bag everything. We're not leaving a single piece behind. She knew now. They weren't dealing with a cartel. They were staring into the core of a network that blurred the line between crime and covert experimentation. Moment 12. The children are moved to a secure facility. Doctors and psychologists begin assessing the trauma. By dawn, the convoy had crossed into U.S. territory, not with siren, but silent. The children, wrapped in blankets, sat in vans retrofitted for care, not containment. They were taken to a black site medical facility, usually reserved for high-risk witnesses and intel assets. But today, it became something else entirely, a sanctuary. Pediatricians, trauma specialists, and psychologists were already waiting. They didn't ask questions at first. They just looked into those hollow eyes and started listening. Some kids couldn't talk. Others wouldn't stop crying. A few had to be sedated, not because they were violent, but because their bodies had forgotten how to rest. One little girl flinched every time a door clicked. A boy curled into a ball under a table and didn't come out for 6 hours. The staff did what they could. They weren't just dealing with physical starvation. This was deep, cellular-level trauma, a kind of dark that clings to the soul long after the lights come back on. Kristi got updates by the hour. She read every medical note, every psychological evaluation. The facts were devastating. Most of these kids had no ID, no name, no record. No one was looking for them because someone had erased their past. And that realization, more than anything else, was the moment Noem knew. This operation was just the beginning, because someone, somewhere, had planned all of this to stay invisible. Moment 13. Files reveal links to corrupt U.S. officials and a cross-border child trafficking network. When the techs cracked open the first hard drive, what spilled out wasn't just data, it was rot. Email, financial transfers, meeting log, all pointing not just south of the border, but straight into U.S. soil. Names of contract, customs agents, even mid-level official federal agents. It was like watching a map redraw itself in real time, not with lines of power, but with fingerprints of betrayal. This wasn't just a criminal network. This was systemic, protect, American-enabled. Kristi paced the secure room like a woman watching her foundation crack. For years, she believed in border, in system, in protocol, but the files made one thing clear. While good people were fighting crime, others were helping it cross through the front door. Some of the names she recognized, some she had briefed with, sat across from, maybe even shook hands. The betrayal wasn't just operational, it was personal. And then came the kicker. The routes used weren't random. They mirrored legal immigration corridors, humanitarian channels, and even foster care pipelines. Kids weren't just trafficked, they were processed like logistics. God damn, one agent whispered, staring at a flow chart linking orphanage records to offshore wire transfers. Noem didn't respond. She just looked out the window, thinking about how deep the rabbit hole went and who else was still inside. Moment 14. A hidden compartment shows someone escaped during the operation. It wasn't over, not even close. As agents swept the final card, a handler noticed something off. A wall panel slightly ajar. No bolts, no dust, just a faint trail. Heat signatures barely linger. Behind it, a crawl space. Enough room for one adult. Empty. A bottle of water. A burner phone still warm. And a handprint on the inside solid wall. Someone had slipped through. Someone who knew the layout, the timing, the weak spot. This wasn't a random escape. It was planned. The realization hit Noem like a second detonation. Someone important was inside that train, she muttered. Probably the one running point. The person with access, leverage, and insurance. And now they were out. Not just gone, vanished. The problem wasn't just who had escaped, but what they were carrying. Intel, leverage, possibly even retaliation plan. The entire team shifted gears. What had felt like closure just cracked open into another chase. Back in the control room, a DHS analyst scanned hours of drone footage in reverse. One shadow, one delay in movement near the tree. That's all they had, a blur. But it was enough. Kristi stood there, fists clenched. She knew this person wasn't just a loose end. They were the match still burning. And wherever they were headed, they weren't going quietly. Moment 15. Leaks on alternative media expose parts of the operation. Public pressure erupt. They say secrets don't stay buried long, especially when blood is involved. Within 48 hours, underground blogs and encrypted forums started buzzing. Blurry photos of the train, a grainy clip of children being carried out, whispered voice notes claiming a DHS raid took down a cartel transport full of human cargo. Noem hadn't planned to go public, not yet. The internet? It had other ideas, and once the story hit, it moved fast. Like wildfire in a dry canyon. People were furious, and not just the usual online outrage. This was deeper. Mothers, teachers, social work, all asking, how long has this been going on? Has our own system been blind? Or worse, complicit? Comments exploded. I don't stop. The train started trending. Talk radio lit up. Journalists begged for statement. Kristi, she stayed silent. For now, she wasn't hiding. She was preparing. Because once the truth came out, it had to come out whole. No cherry picking, no denial. Behind the scenes, her team scrambled to contain the narrative without smothering. Because this was different. This wasn't political scandal or national security fluff. This was raw, human, and people feel it. The question wasn't if the dam would break. It was when. And when it did, Kristi knew exactly what she had to do next, even if it meant lighting the match herself. Moment 16. Noem receives thinly veiled threat. Tread lightly. This is bigger than your jurisdiction. The warning didn't come as a knock or a phone call. It came as a file, unmarked, slid under the door of her secured office at 3:14 a.m. Inside, a printed photo of her walking her dog, another of her kids at a school event. No message, no sender, just a sticky note, handwritten. Tread light. This goes above your clearance. That's all it took. Noem didn't scare easy, but she knew a veiled threat. She saw one, and this one was laced with intent. She'd stepped on someone's throat. Not just cartel, not just smuggler, but someone in a suit, a nameplate, a polished desk in a glass tower, because only people that high up could get that close to her life without leaving a footprint. The message was clear: back off, or watch the wreckage start at home. But Kristi had made peace a long time ago with one fact: power protects itself, and she wasn't built to flinch. Her team tightened security, changed protocol, went radio dark on certain channels. Kristi, she got sharper. If they're threatening me, she told her inner circle, it means I'm exactly where I need to be. Still, a new tension settled in. She wasn't just fighting traffickers anymore. She was up against a system built to bury truth, and the shovels were already in motion. Moment 17. New intel points to a second train leaving from Chihuahua, showing the same trafficking pattern. Just when the dust seemed to settle, the intel team hit gold. Or, depending how you looked at it, hell all over again. Another train, different state, same blueprint. Satellite eyes spotted it leaving Chihuahua under heavy escort. No flags, no markings, just a snake of armored steel slithering north. And this time, the route was fast, more direct, less room for interception. Noem stared at the feed, fists clenched. They're scaling up, she whispered. They're turning this into a system. It wasn't a one-off, it was a model. Same heat signatures, same third car, same secrecy. That changed everything. The first train wasn't an exception. It was a test, a proof of concept. And if this second train made it through, there'd be a third, then a fourth. They weren't smuggling, they were manufacturing. That realization hit Kristi like a gut punch. This wasn't about stopping one train anymore. It was about dismantling a pipeline. Her team scrambled to overlay both routes, comparing timelines, nodes, safe houses. And that's when the pattern emerged. Synchronized moves across states, mirrored checkpoints, political blind spots. It was a web, not a line. And in the center of that web, kids being processed like products. Noem looked at the map and saw it clearly now. "This isn't trafficking," she muttered. "This is logistics, human logistics." Moment 18. Noem realizes it's not a rogue operation, but a systematic network protected by political power. At first, she wanted to believe this was just a rogue cell, a splinter group pushing limits. But when patterns connect, denial dies fast. The scale, the coordination, the money, it wasn't underground, it was embedded. This network wasn't hiding from power, it was power. Politicians, mid-tier bureaucrats, even agencies meant to protect. They weren't just looking the other way, they were engineering the silence. And that silence? It had a body count. Kristi stood in front of a digital board lined with photos, maps, data points. Some of the names in the files were people she'd briefed, people who'd sat in closed-door DHS strategy sessions with her. It wasn't just trail, it was exposure, hers. And yet, somehow, she felt clearer than ever. Because once you know who's on the inside, you know where to aim. They built a system to move children like freight, she said. And now, we burn the track. Her team felt it too, the shift. This was no longer about border enforcement or cartel takedowns. This was about clearing out rot, the kind that wears a badge, funds a campaign, smiles on TV. And Kristi? She was done smiling. The next step wouldn't be quiet, it wouldn't pretty, but it would be real. And it would be loud enough that no one could ignore what came next. Moment 19. She holds a press conference and reveals everything. Name, documents, recording. The country stopped. The room was packed. Noem walked up to the podium without notes, without teleprompter, just a thick folder in her hands and fire in her eye. No suits behind her, no flags flapping, just truth, raw and danger. She started slow, described the train, the children, the evidence. You could hear the breath leave the room when she dropped the first name, a high-ranking federal liaison tied to both trains, then another, then the bank records, the hard drives, the email, receipt. Her voice didn't tremble. It cut. Live on every major network. She laid it bare. No redactions, no ongoing investigation excuse. "If I disappear tomorrow," she said, "let this serve as my record." The press didn't ask questions. They couldn't. The weight of what was unfolding made everyone feel like background noise. Social media exploded. Feeds froze. Phones rang off the hook. You couldn't look away. Not when a DHS secretary just detonated years of cover-ups on national TV. What made it more surreal? The presence of the children's voices. Audio clip, short and chilling, woven into the presentation. One boy asking, "Are we going to be sold again?" A girl whispering, "They said we were going to see our mom." These weren't just facts anymore. They were human. And by the time Kristi stepped down, one thing was clear. The country wasn't just watching a press conference. It was watching history split in half. Moment 20. The truth can no longer be buried. The case explodes globally and redefines DHS forever. The fallout came like thunder after lightning. Headlines went international within hours. From Paris to Tokyo, the same story. America's dark pipeline exposed. The press had a feeding frenzy. But for once, it wasn't just politics or scandal. It was humanity. Civil rights groups mobilized. UN advisors requested access. Congressional hearings were called overnight. DHS, once seen as a wall, was now being remade into a lifeline. Not because of a policy, but because one woman lit the match. Kristi didn't ask for the spotlight, but she didn't run from it either. She knew the machine would try to protect itself. Already, insiders were scrambling, deleting files, spinning narrative, but the dam had cracked. And when truth floods, it doesn't ask for permission. Arrests followed. Resignations came in waves. And for the first time in years, the word just didn't feel like campaign slogan. It felt like something real, something earned. And yet, even in the middle of the storm, Kristi knew this was just the beginning. The network was vast. The shadows still ran. But now the world was watching. And as long as that spotlight burned, they couldn't hide. DHS wasn't just an agency anymore. It was a symbol. One born not from politics, but from courage. And for the first time in a long time, the truth wasn't alone on the track. Conclusion. Now you know. It wasn't just a train, it was a mirror. One that reflected everything we've been too afraid to face. A system that runs on silence. A network so well-oiled, it turned kids into cargo. But here's the truth. Exposure isn't enough. Change doesn't come from watching. It comes from doing something with what you've just learned. So ask yourself, will you scroll past this, or will you speak up? Will you stay comfortable, or will you get uncomfortable for the right reasons? Because if one woman can bring a secret train to a halt, imagine what all of us could stop together. If this story shook, share it. If it lit a fire in you, feed it. And if you want to keep uncovering what most would rather keep buried, hit subscribe, turn on the notifications, and stay with us. This is just the beginning.